Hi, good morning. I'm Sally Morrissey and I'm the manager of the Domestic Abuse Support Service in the county of Gloucestershire, where Sarah is based as well. I've worked in the field of domestic abuse since 1979, so a very long time. And the changes that I've seen in that time have been absolutely incredible. And we are clearly in a much better place today than we were when I started in 1979. We've come a hell of a long way, and there are more and more agencies involved in supporting victims of domestic abuse. And that's the beauty of the model that we've got, in that we are a very multi-agency based support service. About 3.5 years ago, Gloucestershire County Council decided they were going to recommission the domestic abuse services in Gloucestershire. And what they've done is they've done a lot of consultation, both with victims, agencies, people working in the field, to try and come up with a model that they thought would work better. And the model that they came up with was, and probably still is, a little bit controversial, in that they decided to move away from being so refuge-based in their support for the victims. At the time, there were 4 refuges in the county of Gloucestershire. 3 of them were managed and owned by Stonham, and 1 was a local independent organisation. Following the recommissioning of the services, Stonham were not successful and decided that they would close all the refuges down because they didn't want to carry on. But the 1 local independent voluntary organisation decided that it would carry on, and they provide 8 refuge beds in the county. So the model that we've got is much more based in an outreach, community-based type model. So we moved away from being based around refuges. And I'll just talk you briefly through that model and try and explain to you some of the advantages that we found of working with this model. It does seem a bit strange to come to a housing conference and tell them how you've got rid of housing as part of the model, but I'll hopefully explain that to you. If I can get this to work. Yeah. So what do we offer? Well, we cover the whole of the county, and we provide support to male and female victims of domestic abuse. And we've got a help desk, we've got a floating support team, we've got an IDFA team, we have a court IDFA based in the courts, we do group work, we work with young people, we coordinate the sanctuary scheme, we're heavily involved with working with the police, we're part of the multi-agency safeguarding hub, and we're also part of a pilot project being piloted by social care, which is again another multi-agency approach. So our help desk is open Monday to Friday. We've got 4 support workers who cover the help desk, and it's basically the central referral point for the whole of the county or for victims out of county. And what they do is they will talk through the options, they'll give advice, they'll do risk assessments, or they'll signpost on to other agencies if that's more appropriate. So all the time that they're talking to somebody, they'll be assessing the risk. Our whole model is based around getting that risk assessment correct. So they'll be looking at what's gone on that's prompted that victim to phone on that day, because there could have been an incident. But very importantly, they will be looking at the whole history of what has happened, and that's really, really important. And that's where you start to see, as Sarah was saying, the stuff around the coercive control, about how it's not just about an incident that happened the night before, but there's a whole picture to be told. Once they've done that assessment, if they assess the risk as being very high, then they'll go into the MARAC process. I'll talk about that in a minute. But if through the risk assessment that we do, we feel that they constitute a medium or standard risk, then they'll be offered a floating support service. And what that means is they'll get allocated a worker. That worker will meet with them, assess their support needs, and come up with a support plan. And this model is all based around a model called the response-based approach. Now, this is fairly new in this country. It was piloted in Canada and found to be very successful in working with victims of both domestic and sexual violence. And the ethos of this model is all about building up the strengths of that individual. So it's looking at what's happened to them and getting them to identify how they managed to cope in that situation and what their strengths have been. So, for example, one of the things that people often ask is, why didn't you leave? It's a common thing because people can't believe. So and it's a question, and it's almost, when you ask it in that way, you're almost victim blaming. Well, it's your own fault because you stayed. What we would do in the response-based approach is we would say, why did you make that decision to stay? And then victims will start to think about, why did I do that? Well, usually it's because they are actually managing the risk. Every single day they are thinking about the risk. Is the risk to leave greater than the risk to stay? If I do this, if I do that, if I do the other. And once you start to explain to victims, actually, you've actually got all these strengths in you because you've managed this incredibly well, then we can start to build up their self-confidence and their self-esteem. So that's how the response-based approach works. The aim of the service is to keep clients safe in their own home. And this came out of some consultation that was done in Gloucestershire with victims, and it was the same story. People saying, why is it always me that's got to leave? Why have I got to go? Why have I got to take my kids out of school? Why have I got to leave my family and jobs behind and go into a refuge? Why always me? And it is often a response that you get for victims of domestic abuse. It's always them that has to sort out the issues. It's for instance, social workers will often say in child protection conferences, right, the victim, right, she's got to do the freedom programme, she's got to do this, she's got to do that. And it's like, hang on a minute, there's a perpetrator here, and constantly we're seeing the perpetrator just walks away, just totally absolves themselves of any responsibility. So what we're trying to do is build up people's strengths that will allow them to remain within their own home. Now, it isn't always possible, but we're finding that once we give that as an option and say we can support you to do that, we can support you with the legal remedies that you might feel safer with if you had, we can support you with sanctuary, with target hardening, then we're finding that a lot of people are saying, yeah, okay, I can do that, I want to stay in my own home, why should I have to give it up? All our staff are also trained as Mackenzie Friends, because going through the legal process is incredibly intimidating, and victims will often talk about secondary victimisation. It's awful. So they need somebody with them. So all our staff have been trained in Mackenzie Friends. Now, Mackenzie Friend, you can't talk in the court, but you can actually sit there next to your client and you can write notes and you can just be that friend basically in court. And that really helps people to pursue a court case, because often people will drop out because it is so intimidating. So if we assess somebody as being high risk, then they'll be allocated an independent domestic violence advisor, and I'm sure most of you probably come across these. So they're working with the highest risk cases, and they're working in a very multi-agency way. They're not doing this on their own. When it's high risk, we can't do it on our own. We've got to have all the other agencies involved. So they're looking at safety planning. That's their first thing they do, is assess the risk, put a safety plan into place. They will attend the MARAC, which is the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference, and they will be the voice of that victim. And the other agencies that are there will be social care, health, police, maybe housing if it's important for housing to be there, probation. Whoever needs to be there will be at that meeting. And those meetings are chaired by the police, and there's a special unit within Gloucestershire that deals with that. Within that IDVA team, we have specialists. So we have an ISVA, which is an independent sexual violence advisor, because what we find is that often there's high levels of sexual violence as well within a domestic setting. So we have somebody who's specially trained in that area of work. We also have a YITVA, which is a young person's domestic violence advisor, because what we found is that since the definition changed and 16 to 18-year-olds were brought in as victims of domestic abuse, because prior to that it'd been child protection, but they're now seen as being victims in their own right, the numbers of young people coming through our service is actually quite high. And it's always that thing, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? It's good that they're contacting us, but it's not good that we're seeing 16-year-olds who are in violent and abusive relationships. And it requires a different sort of skill set quite often to get those young people engaged with service. So we've had somebody specially trained by, they used to be CARDA and now they're Save Lives, to actually do that work. Our IDVAs will also attend the retraction clinic. So that is a clinic that's run by the police, and if a victim makes a statement and then somewhere along the line thinks, oh, hang on a minute, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm going to retract, then the police have a retraction clinic and the victim has to go and sign a statement to say they want to retract. We have an IDVA based at that retraction clinic so that they can actually check out with the victim that they're not being coerced into doing this and that they do actually want to retract. Or if, with a bit of support, they might like to continue with the case. And we've got about a 50-50 success rate on getting people to continue with cases with the support of a GDAS worker. We also got a court IDVA. And every Tuesday in Gloucestershire at Cheltenham there is a specialist domestic violence court. So all cases of domestic abuse go into that court. So if somebody's arrested on a Thursday night, they'll appear the following Tuesday and charged at that court. And it's for them to then enter their plea of guilty or not guilty. Now what the court IDVA will do is they get a list before that court happens on the Tuesday. They'll go through that list and they'll attempt to contact all the victims on that list and basically ask them what they would like to happen in court. Because at that stage the victim isn't there, so there's no one to speak for the victim. So the perpetrator can say all sorts of stuff and nobody's listening to the victim. So our court IDVA is there and will speak on their behalf. They'll take instructions from the victim, they'll give advice, and so if the victim says, well, I'd like a restraining order, then the court IDVA has the right of audience to ask in that court for a restraining order. They also, at the end of that day, will feed back to the victims what's happened in court, because that's another issue that victims have told us, that things go into court, nobody contacts them, they don't know what's happened, is he suddenly going to turn up on the doorstep? Again, the court IDVA will make sure that they know what has happened, and if there's been any bail conditions attached to say that he shouldn't be there, then that victim is ready and waiting and aware of what they can do with a safety plan from the court IDVA, and know that they can phone the police if he turns up and say, look, he's been in court this morning and basically his bail conditions say he's not allowed to come anywhere near me. So that's the role of the court IDVA. We're quite lucky in Gloucestershire in our court IDVA is also a trained and qualified paralegal, which means that she can give legal advice to victims as well about the various orders that might be available. We do group work. We run the Freedom Programme, which is a national programme that's rolled out, 10-week rolling programme. We've got our own programme, which is the Phoenix Programme. Again, this is a 10-week programme, Now, the Freedom Programme is for victims at whatever stage they're at, so they might still be within a relationship. And what it does is it looks at the behaviour of the perpetrator. Phoenix programme is different because that is for victims who've actually moved away from that relationship and now feel they're in a place to examine and think about things that have happened to them and how they can move on. But people have got to be ready to do that programme, so there's quite an assessment process, because we don't want people getting in there and then suddenly finding out, oh no, this is too much for me, this is actually going to make me worse. We run the Trust and Understanding Families group, which is a group work programme for mums and children. So the mums will go to one workshop, children will go to the other, and it's about supporting mum to support the children and to come through what they've been through. Because we find that often the views and the needs of the child are not really taken into account. People think, oh, you know, kids, they're really resilient, they've got away from it all now, they'll be okay. They won't be okay. And in fact, research tells us that the younger a child is living in a family with domestic abuse, the more likely they are to be affected by it. Because a baby of 6 months who's in a cot in another room, where not even in the same room where the violence happens, can be so badly affected because your brain at that age is like a sponge and you will absorb everything that happens and goes on around you, but you have no mechanism for explaining that or talking about that, so that stays in there. So it's really, really important that we support children to come through come through what's happened to them. We have a group of volunteers who help us to run these group work programmes as well. Work with young people, as Sarah mentioned, we work very closely with the Holly Gazzard Trust, which is a trust that was set up by the Gazzard family following the murder of Holly in the centre of Gloucester. And one of their aims is to really try and educate young people around domestic abuse and unhealthy relationships. So they fund a worker for us to be able to go into schools and to do that work. And the reason they wanted to do that was because Holly herself was only 20 years of age when she was murdered. And that was followed fairly quickly by yet another domestic homicide in the county of a 16-year-old girl who was 6 months pregnant and still at school. And I think things like that are actually really shocking that it's happening to such young people. We have a duty to try and educate our young people about healthy relationships. This is the only way we're going to stop things getting like this. So we've developed a series of workshops. We go into schools, we go into youth groups, and we talk about healthy relationships. And we also, as part of those workshops, excuse me, we talk to young people about how they can support a friend who they think is going through that. Because often young people will become isolated because they've got a boyfriend and he starts to control them, so they won't be seeing their friends. So their friends will gradually drop off and think, oh, I'm not going to phone up Susan or whatever because she never comes out anyway because she's always with Jimmy or whatever. And so they can lose those friendships really quickly. So we talk to young people about how they can support a friend who they think may be going through this as well as trying to educate young people about what is a healthy and unhealthy relationship. We run a specific group work programme for 13 to 19-year-olds. And this is a programme that was developed by West Mercia Women's Aid and has been accredited by the University of Worcester. And again, it's looking at getting young people to understand the impact of domestic abuse. So it's for young people who maybe have lived in a family where there is domestic abuse, or it can be young people who feel that they may be at risk or just want to know more about domestic abuse. And it's for young men and young women as well. And we work with some male facilitators as well, because we're an all-female service. But we have links with youth groups, youth organisations, and some of those male workers within those organisations have been trained up to deliver crush. It's really important that we show that there are positive male role models out there, particularly for young men, and that they don't have to revert to violence. We coordinate the sanctuary scheme, so this is what helps us to enable people to stay within their own home. You're probably aware of the sanctuary scheme. It's security measures that can go into someone's house to make them feel safer, and it can be anything from, I don't know, we've done things like CCTV, we've done lights, we've done fencing, just to make that victim feel that bit safer in her own home. Obviously, each of the district councils have a pot of money to do what they call target hardening, so that'll be just things like changing locks, the smaller jobs. But we manage all that, and we've got that funded through the Police and Crime Commissioner in Gloucestershire. We work very, very closely with the police. It's really important. At this moment in time, now in Gloucestershire, every time a police officer goes out to a domestic incident, they will complete a DASH form, which is a domestic abuse, stalking and harassment risk assessment. And every single one of those will come in to our help desk. So that means we've got a chance to get in touch with victims quickly to actually see if they would like support from us and what we can do for them. We also work with the police on the prisoner release scheme. Again, a scheme that often victims have told us that, you know, he's gone to prison and then suddenly he's come out and he's on the doorstep and nobody's thought to let the victim know. So what the police do is they get a list of all the people that are going to be released from prison who are in there because of domestic abuse, and they contact us and we go out with the police and we meet with those people and see if they need support from us going forward. We're part of the Clare's Law panel, which as you probably know is a right to ask, a right to know, so anybody can put in a request and ask for information if they suddenly find themselves in a new relationship and think, hang on a minute, there's something not quite right here. Then there's a panel that sits in Gloucestershire and looks at all those requests, and we're part of that, so we share our information. We're also working with the police on the DVPOs, which I have to say haven't been widely used in Gloucestershire, which is a shame, and they're the orders that can be granted if the police go out to a domestic and feel that they've not got enough to arrest, then they can apply for a DVPO, which will say that the perpetrator has to be away from the property for either 14 or 28 days. And that goes in before a magistrate and is heard very quickly. So what we do, the police will let us know every time that a DVPO has been granted, and we can get a support worker in touch with that victim again to see if they want support from us. We're part of the multi-agency safeguarding hub, so that's where all the safeguarding referrals go into. So we help compile all the information that's needed to make safeguarding decisions around young people or vulnerable adults. And again, we're working with education, police, health, youth support service, social care. We've got a worker based within the pods, which is a new initiative in Gloucestershire, in Gloucester City. And basically it's social care, but within their unit they've now got us, the local drug and alcohol agency, the local mental health support group, because what social workers will often tell us is that they're working with clients who've got what we call the toxic three: domestic abuse, mental health, drug and alcohol issues, and they recognise that they can't do it all on their own, that they need agencies like us to come in and support them with that work. So how many people are we talking about in Gloucestershire that we've supported? Well, we've had 2,374 people supported overall. 861 were on our floating support scheme. Added on to that were 606 IDVA clients. Core IDVA supported 486, we've supported 161 people in group work, 11 people in places of safety. As I said before, we've moved away from the refuge model, and what we've done in the interim, whilst we are setting up the places of safety properly, is if somebody has needed to go and leave their home that night, then we've looked at where we can possibly place them. And that's been a range of things, from it might be that they can stay with a friend, a relative, or we paid for them to go into a hotel overnight. And quite often that gives us a bit of an opportunity to work with them to maybe put some legal things into place to get them back into their own home. And who are we talking about? Well, 95% of our victims are female, 5% are male. Now, I suspect there is an underreporting still for male victims. I still think there's a stigma around male victims coming forward. But at least we're starting to make inroads. Issues are different for men than they are for women. But we are seeing some extremely violent women, and quite a lot of our male cases actually have to go through the MARAC process because the violence has been quite extreme. So it clearly is an issue. Right, so what's the advantage of the model that we're working with since we've moved away from refuge? Well, what it does, it allows us to be more flexible because we're not tied into properties, which means that we can have our staff based out in the community, which means that they make links in those communities, they find out what's out there, they find out about other organisations that they can link in, that they can link victims in with. It gives us that flexibility. It also means that in Gloucestershire now, there are more victims being supported than there were when it was just the refuge model. Because once your refuge is full, then that's it. We never operate a waiting list. We never turn anybody away for support. If we're really struggling, then it may be phone support initially until we can get an actual body out to them. But it allows us that flexibility. We're not tied into refuge. It also means that we have the ability to support very complex clients, because I'm not having a go at refuge here because I think there is a place for refuge and we do use the one in Gloucestershire, but a lot of refuges will not be able to accept victims who've got drug, alcohol, mental health problems because it's communal living and there'll be all sorts of safeguarding issues. So we know that we're not going to get those people into a refuge anyway, so there's no point even trying. So what we have to do is have a model that can support those victims, also address the drug and alcohol issues, excuse me, as well as the domestic abuse. So refuge doesn't work for those group of people. And I think we can see from the work that we're doing in the pods in Gloucester, there's a high percentage of victims of domestic abuse that have mental health, drug and alcohol problems. Why wouldn't they, having been through what they've been through? So that's the model that we've got. As Sarah said, we have got some money now from the DCLG, so we will be having places of safety throughout the county. We're going to have 12, 2 in each of the 6 districts, because we've got 6 district councils and 1 county council. And the reason we've gone with that model again is because they will be individual units, so we can place people in them who maybe have additional support needs because they won't be living communally, and they'll have a worker attached to them to do that intensive support with them that they may need. And that's about it from me. That's a quick run through the model that we've got in Gloucestershire. We're finding it's working. We're finding we're able to support far more victims than were being supported before through the refuge model. But whilst recognising that there is some women for whom refuges work really well, it's not having a go at a refuge at all. It's just looking at things maybe slightly differently. So that's me. Have anybody got any questions?